Hello and welcome to another Brawl video here in the new Avatar metagame. Today we're checking out this white, red and green or Naya colored earthbending deck featuring Toph, the First Metalbender, as my commander, voted on by my supporters on Patreon. This 4 mana 3/3 says non-token artifacts we control are lands in addition to their other types, but interestingly enough, those lands don't tap for mana. And then at the beginning of our end step, we get to Earthbend 2, meaning we can choose a land we control, turn it into a 0/0 creature, and put 2+1 counters on it. If that creature were to get destroyed or exiled, we do get to return that land, or sometimes artifact in this case, back to the battlefield. So Toph is a very interesting build around, also leads to some very interesting rules interactions with landfall, because now playing an artifact will also trigger landfall, so that can potentially set up some neat synergies. And Toph can also set up some powerful recursion when it comes to artifacts that we can now turn into lands with the earthbending mechanic, sacrifice them to their own ability, and then they will immediately come back thanks to the earthbending effect. So that can also set up some powerful recursion, maybe letting us Mindslaver lock our opponents out of the game. So we'll get to that in just a second. But for now, let's take a look at the quick breakdown here. I've split the deck up into a few different categories, starting with our generic mana acceleration, some ramp cards to get our game plan online a little bit sooner, because our commander is on the pricey side. Then of course we also have lots of other earthbending cards to synergize with Toph, and earthbending naturally also synergizes with landfall and with +1 counter synergies, so we've got all of those throughout. The next category are those landfall cards, which trigger when a land enters, so that can also maybe trigger when an earthbending land gets destroyed and returns to the battlefield, or if we, like we mentioned, play an artifact with Toph in play. And then we've got more +1 counter synergies. Some of our landfall cards also work well with +1 counters, and earthbending does as well. So now we get to maybe amplify all of those effects and get even more counters out of all those abilities. Then we also have a section dedicated to artifacts, which we can also maybe earthbend onto and then get back with Toph's ability. So that can also be very powerful. And one of the standout cards, as we mentioned, is Mindslaver, which allows us to take control of the opponent's next turn. If we earthbend onto it, we can essentially keep activating it turn after turn, because it will come back with the earthbending mechanic, so that can essentially win the game on the spot. And then finally our miscellaneous section has a bit more removal. Don't have a ton of room for interaction if we want to make room for all these other effects, but then there's some other cards that play well with Toph or with landfall mechanics. So yeah, that's our deck in a nutshell. Now for the deep dive, starting with our generic mana acceleration, we've got some 1 mana creatures to help out. Pilgrim, Birds of Paradise, Halfling can make our legends uncounterable. There's Elvish Mystic and Eleanor Elves. Then at 2 mana we can also put additional lands in play with Explore. There's Farseek, Rampant Growth, and the newly added Shared Roots, which is just Rampant Growth but also a lesson. Then Arcane Signet offers a bit more mana acceleration. There's Cultivate, which can get 2 basics, 1 in play, 1 in hand. Solemn is also a good one, as it helps us find a basic when it enters, can maybe earthbend onto it, and then when it dies we get to draw a card, it returns back into play, once again finding another land, so that's also a good one to maybe chump with. And then Primeval Titan, legal in Brawl, so we'll make use of it, can find multiple lands when it enters or when it attacks, so it can also get our landfall synergies going. And then a Tectonic Split is a new and very interesting enchantment. As an additional cost to cast it, we have to sacrifice half of our lands, rounded up, so hopefully it does not get countered. Then it's an enchantment with hexproof, saying lands we control can now tap to add 3 mana of any one color. So it makes up for the fact that we sacrificed a bunch of lands, especially if we can ramp into this using mana creatures or ramp artifacts, so we don't necessarily have 6 lands in play. And then a Tectonic Split also allows all our artifacts that are turned into lands by Toph to now also tap for 3 mana of any color, whereas before they wouldn't make any mana whatsoever. So that's the real strength of this card. There's a few other abilities that can enable a similar effect, like Rite of the Elysian Grove, but there we can only tap our artifacts that are now lands for only 1 mana of any color, same with a Great Divide Guide, and we also have Yavimaya in the mana base, which also turns all our lands into forests, so now those artifacts can also tap for a green, so that's another interaction to keep in mind. Then moving on to our earthbending cards, there's the Badger Mole Cub, great especially with our mana elves, but also with all our lands that are earthbended, which now tap for 2 mana. There's the Earthbender Ascension, which will find a land, and with landfall can also pick up additional counters once we have 4 or more quest counters on the Ascension, so that's another landfall payoff. Also giving trample is pretty relevant if we're putting a lot of counters onto the same permanent. Then there's the Earthbending Student, letting us Earthbend 2. Lands have Vigilance now as well, so we can attack and still tap them for mana. Then Toph the Blind Bandit has power equal to the number of +1 counters on lands we control, and will Earthbend 2 when it enters. Often we want to Earthbend onto our Surveil lands, so if they get removed, we get to Surveil again. And you can also sometimes Earthbend onto a fetch land, and then after Earthbending onto it, we can immediately sacrifice it, get a land, get the fetch land back thanks to the Earthbending mechanic, so that's another way of ramping. Then a Solid Ground lets us Earthbend 3 and also acts as a Hardened Scales, which we also have in the +1 counter category. Then a Toph Earthbending Master has a landfall giving us extra experience counters, and when we attack, doesn't have to be with Toph itself, we get to Earthbend X, where X is the number of experience counters we have, so that's another nice way to generate multiple creature lanes. Then Toph Greatest Earthbender will give our land creatures double strike, so that can be quite the payoff if we have lots of lands in play. And when it enters, we get to Earthbend X, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast it, so it's going to be at least 4. Then a Bumi Unleashed is another nice payoff, as it will not only Earthbend 4 when it enters, but if it deals combat damage to a player, we now get to untap all our lands, and after this phase there's an additional combat phase where only land creatures get to attack, so potentially gives us the opportunity to attack with a bunch of our lands twice. Then the Legend of Kyoshi lets us draw equal to the greatest power among creatures we control. On Chapter 2, Earthbend X, where X is the number of cards in hand, so that can also get out of hand. And then finally we get to transform it into Avatar Kyoshi, which will give our lands trample and hexproof and can also make a bunch of mana. And then finally we also have Avatar Kyoshi Earthbender, the 8 mana creature that's a 6/6, during our turn has hexproof, and at the beginning of combat lets us Earthbend 8, as well as untapping that land so we can immediately attack with it. We also have a bunch of lands in our mana base that are indestructible, so if we can Earthbend onto those, we'll have an indestructible creature that can attack and block where needed. Then moving on to our landfall cards, we've got a few ways to generate additional +1 counters with landfall, such as on Bristly Bill, can also activate to double the number of counters. There's the Scythecat Cub. Mossborn Hydra is more of a standalone threat that keeps getting bigger and bigger. Then we can also generate additional mana with landfall using Lotus Cobra. We can generate treasures with a Tireless Provisioner. And then this sounds also quite similar to the Lotus Cobra, can also find additional elves and elementals. And then Evolution Sage lets us proliferate with landfall, so that means additional +1 counters on all our creatures usually, as well as maybe additional experience counters with the Earthbending Master, another interaction that can come up. Then Tanuk will deal damage with landfall and maybe even draw an extra card if we enabled it twice. Felidar Retreat also bridges the gap with our +1 counter synergies, as we can put a +1 counter on the entire team, as well as give them Vigilance until end of turn with every land drop, or we can generate additional 2/2 tokens. The Eye-Still Explorer also very good with our fetch lands, helping us replay them every turn, and can play an additional land each turn as well, so another great way to ramp. And then Morag can also maybe give us additional attack steps. Do have to be careful here, since you only get to untap your creatures with the ability, which if you enabled landfall in your first main phase, kind of goes to waste, since you'll get the additional attack step with the untap, and then you go to your regular attack step without the untap step. So if you have Morag in play, usually you want to wait to play your lands until your second main phase, so you get those additional attack steps with the untap step as well. So that's another important interaction to keep in mind. Then moving on to our +1 counter synergies, we mentioned Hardened Scales, have it in a 1 mana enchantment form. The Ozolith can also maybe save up some of our +1 counters on our creatures that died. Ozolith the Shattered Spire can give us an extra counter each time, can also activate to give us those 2 counters. Terra Symbiosis, a form of card advantage when we're placing counters on our creatures. Ouroboros, incredibly powerful if it gets going, especially if we can increase its power first. And then Earth Crystal, since most of our deck is green, can give us a nice mana discount, as well as doubling the number of counters we get each time. And then we've got our artifacts with Mishra's Bauble, just a cheap cantrip, can Earthbend onto it, sacrifice it, and get it back while still drawing a card, but we can also just cycle it, maybe in combination with our fetch lands for additional information, and if we don't like the top card of our deck, we can shuffle it away. We've got Enlightened Tutor, which is often going to find Mindslaver, which, as we mentioned, is the primary way we can combo with Toph to just get the game over with. Then there's Esper Sentinel, also nice to earthbend onto with Toph to increase the attacks. We've got Haywire Might. If we earthbend onto it, we can keep blowing it up over and over to get rid of opposing non-creature artifacts and enchantments. Ichor Wellspring, also quite nice if it dies, as we'll get to draw a card when it leaves the battlefield, and then once again when it enters. And then Lightning Greaves, a way to give our creatures haste and shroud to maybe protect some of our key threats or to immediately attack with a Primeval Titan or Bumi. Then we've got Liquid Metal Coating, can target our creatures maybe to turn them into artifacts. So now Toph can also earthbend onto them, so then if they get removed, they will come back. So that's another very cool interaction. We mentioned Mindslaver, and then Portal to Phyrexia, a very nice curve topper that can maybe wipe the opponent's board, can also earthbend onto it, and then maybe keep looping it over and over. And then finally our miscellaneous section has a bit of a removal with Portable Hole, also an artifact we can earthbend onto with Toph, as well as Swords to Plowshares, just a very powerful card. We've got Sylvan Safekeeper, can also sacrifice lands to protect our key threats, but it can also make it so we can maybe sacrifice some of our earthbended permanents and then get them back with earthbending mechanic to maybe re-trigger landfall or some enter the battlefield abilities. We've got the Blossoming Tortoise, which will give our land creatures +1/+1, and can also get back a land from graveyard when it enters or attacks, also discounts activated abilities for what it's worth. Bright Glass Gearhulk, also very good to earthbend onto with Toph, as it will maybe come back and trigger an additional time to find additional 1-mana artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. We've got Annie Joins Up to double the triggers from our legends, as well as dealing 5 to a creature or planeswalker when it enters. The One Ring can draw additional cards and is also an indestructible artifact we can maybe earthbend onto with Toph to make an indestructible creature. Then there's Ashaya, turning all our creatures into lands, so they now also all trigger landfall, and more importantly we can now also earthbend onto all our creatures with Toph to maybe save them from opposing removal. And then Titania, also very good with our fetch lands, which can now also generate a 5/3 elemental token each time. And then our mana base has a few utility lands. The Air Temple also has good synergy with our +1 counter cards. We've got Basing Se as a way to earthbend for 3 mana if we tap it. And then Boseiju, a way to blow up artifacts and enchantments. And then I mentioned some of the indestructible lands in the mana base. We've got one in every multicolor pair. The cycle of bridges that enter tapped, make 2 colors, and then are indestructible, as well as a Darksteel Citadel, which is untapped but colorless, and then plenty of fetch lands, which can get our various dual lands, including shock lands like Temple Garden, or perhaps the Surveil lands like the Lush Portico. And then Secret Tunnel, of course, also had to make the cut as an unblockable land, so we would love to earthbend onto it, and the opponent wouldn't be able to stop it. And then we also have Yavimaya, as I mentioned, another way to turn all our lands into forests, so some of those artifacts will now also be able to tap for mana. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the play, facing Dyadrine, green-white counters. Our hand is decent, could use some more ramp. But we'll start with Sentinel, maybe we'll get to draw a card off of it. And then Hardened Scales plus Ouroboros, pretty decent. Basing Se will enter untapped next turn. Hit you for 1. So we'll be able to curve Provisioner into either Ouroboros or Toph. It's going to be a Gala Greeters for now. If we use the treasures from Provisioner, we can also maybe ramp out the Tectonic Split. Do I offer the trade? Sure, if they want to trade their 2-drop for Sentinel, that's fine by me. So if I were to play Toph, I can maybe earthbend onto the Sentinel, which would also increase its tax. Land tax is actually pretty funny with Tectonic Split, because we'll eventually end up with fewer lands than my opponent. Although I'm probably going to have to trigger it at least once. Fabled Passage. I mean, if I'm really petty, I could Fabled Passage and then just not get a land. Or I can just cast Tectonic Split right now with the 2 treasures. That makes more sense. Sacrifice Plains and Forest. And hit for 3. I guess Sentinel can attack once again. So land tax is not going to trigger. Now my lands all tap for 3 mana. So next turn I could cast Avatar Kyoshi, Earthbend 8. Or I can go for Toph plus Uroboroid. And Dyadrine enters with extra counters from Ozolith. Gala Greeters does the same. And our opponent's gonna draw a card, make a 2/2, trigger Greeters again, which now makes a tap treasure. So our opponent's deck is also starting to get going. Alright, so make a treasure. Play Toph, and then have to be somewhat careful with how I tap my lands. Probably better to Earthbend on a land as opposed to the Sentinel, although could be convinced to just grow this. Although with Uroboroids, everything's gonna get bigger. Possible they're keeping up removal. Ozolith can only be activated as a sorcery, so they might be keeping up something else. Alright, that resolves. I don't even know if I want to attack here. I'll just chill. Opponent had a Thalia, so that can maybe reset some of my counters. Thalia exiling a land doesn't matter if it's Earthbended, so yeah, can still put counters here. Get 1 extra from Hardened Scales. They can exile my treasure token for good, or they can reset Uroboroid. They had a Get Lost. Pay 3, no, so I get to draw. And an indestructible land is especially nice to Earthbend onto. Tectonic Split also quite flavorful with Avatar Kyoshi. Glyph Elemental +1/+1 for each +1 counter on it. And Landfall picks up more counters. So we should have some reasonable blocks available. Activate Ozolith. Alright, so can play Avatar Kyoshi. The Sentinel also taps for 3 mana, since it's a land thanks to Toph, and Tectonic Split affects all lands. So that's a pretty neat interaction. Yeah, sure. And then with the leftover mana we can go exploring onto... maybe... let's see. I do get to Earthbend 8, so that's going to be 9 counters with Hardened Scales. I can make this one enormous. Yeah, let's just kind of spread out the counters a bit. Portable Hole seems fine. Play the bridge. Make a treasure. Could explore again for an extra counter. Making sure to use a treasure. Could make this bigger too, has built-in hexproof. And then I think I still grow Sundown Pass. Because with Thalia they could even exile an indestructible land to reset it. And this can attack too. And then Toph can maybe earthbend onto the bridge end of turn. Ba Sing Se can also earthbend some more. So we've got a lot going on. I guess it's only in our turn where it has hexproof. But yeah, if they want to flicker it, that's fine by me. Thalia grows. Targets the Avatar. And I'll take 6. And Duelist can draw them more cards. So yeah, both decks getting to do their thing. Now I can use Portable Hold to reset their Gala Greeters and set up a pretty deadly attack. And our opponent scoops it up, onto the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Samwise, mono white, with a Ring Bearer mechanic, can also get back fetch lanes. What do I think of my hand? It's maybe a little slow without any ramp. Let's take a mulligan. This seems better. Got plenty of ramp, maybe too much, but yeah, I'll keep it. Artifact ramp also more synergistic with Tectonic Split, because we'll be able to cast it ahead of schedule without necessarily sacrificing a ton of lanes. Any way to trigger Toph multiple times. So yeah, just need to find some more creatures eventually. Bridge an indestructible artifact land. Drawback is that it enters tapped. Alright, Relic, a form of graveyard hate, which does now affect the Explorer, otherwise we didn't really care. So can a Rampant Growth and get maybe a dual land. Fetch land's gone. Okay, just gonna cultivate here, so I can still hit my lane drop. And then next turn maybe go Signet into Any Joins Up, which then sets up Tectonic Split. And by sacking my lanes, I can eventually get them back with the Explorer. Samwise maybe getting back the Courtyard here. Brought back, gets it back instead. Alright, so the mono-white deck is ramping. Okay, now I could go Signet into maybe Earth Crystal over the One Ring. Could also play Toph. Let's get our mana engine online first, and then Toph is gonna look a bit better. Alright, Loran blows up my Earth Crystal, unfortunately. Tectonic Split does have hexproof, so it's a bit harder for the opponent to remove. Yeah, I can go for it now. And then sack 3 basics. That resolves at least. Would have been painful if they had one of those white counter spells like Mana Tithe. And then next turn maybe start with Explorer. A Wedding Announcement is acceptable. And the Requisition Raid blows up my artifact. Okay, so we'll need to make some green mana. Play Explorer. Immediately replay 2 lanes. They could respond with removal now in response to the landfall trigger, and they actually had a Path to Exile. So I cannot play another land in response, but Path to Exile will get me another land. So it's not the end of the world. This still taps for 3. So I could play Wandering Activate, I could play an Ouroboros, get that going. Sure. And then next turn I can unload most of my hand. Alright, Elspeth Conquers Death, another nice removal spell, exiles Ouroboros. Also would have been an answer to the Indestructible Wandering, which I can also turn into a creature with Toph. So there's some cool things we're about to do. So I have, how much mana? 15. Using Annie on Loran's not the best when Samwise can get it back. So then I might be better off just destroying a token. But I can draw with the Wandering first. See what I get. Avatar Kyoshi, I can still play. Yeah, I guess we go for the Avatar here. Has hexproof, I can still Farseek. And get a Surveil land. Abandoned Air Temple doesn't seem super necessary. Better than a regular land. And then how about we animate the Indestructible Bridge. And then I can either hit for 8 or we can play defense. Yeah, I guess we'll hit for 8. We're protected from the Wandering anyways. If they get back Loran, there's nothing they can blow up since everything's indestructible. Now my non-creature spells get taxed. And the Cavalier can destroy my Avatar. And get a 3-3 in return, and now Loran blows up my 3-3. So a lot of creature removal. And they don't have anything to return at least. So we don't necessarily want to set up their Chapter 3. Okay, so now what? Toph, animate the Wandering. This can play defense, maybe draw in the opponent's turn. Again, don't really want to play any joins up this turn because of Elspeth just getting it back. So then, I mean, I guess we could still take out the token so that Toph gets to trigger twice. Do I have enough mana to cast everything? I assume I do. So this now also taps for 3 mana thanks to the Tectonic Split. No point in attacking. And then we get to Earthbend 2 twice, once on the ring, once on another land. Okay, and then I can still draw with the ring. Cityscape Levelers next. Takes out Toph. This still remains a creature, because Earthbend just turns it into a creature. Our opponent doesn't have any good attacks. And end of turn I'll draw. And our opponent scoops it up. Yeah, the card advantage from the One Ring is just too much for them to handle. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Fire Lord Azula, so Grixis can be pretty controlling. I do have a Lightning Greaves to protect my stuff, so that helps. Plenty of fetch lanes. Liquid Metal Coating can also turn my creatures into artifacts, and then I can Earthbend onto them. So we have some options. So let's Bauble for now. I don't think I need to save Bauble to Earthbend onto. Provisioner I would like to draw into, so then I'll just play the fetch, draw, and then fetch end of turn. As opposed to, if there's a card I don't want, I can just fetch right away. And get a Surveil. And a Banter Mole. It is a form of ramp, so it's better than playing Bill here. So let me just get basic mountains fine. Could also play a Lightning Greaves first, so then I can protect all my future creatures. Maybe makes more sense. Although Cub sets up Provisioner into a fetch land, which is ideal. And if they remove the Cub, it's not the end of the world. Target the Portico so that if it does get removed, I get to Surveil again. Just a Talisman here. Alright, so I can go Provisioner. Play my fetch lanes. Make some treasure. And then make another treasure. Play Lightning Greaves. Equip at this point. Probably the Provisioner, so I can attack. Question is if I switch it to the Mole or if I keep it on the Provisioner. Because I don't have a land in hand to trigger Landfall again. So the Cub actually provides an extra mana. It's probably still Provisioner. So no black mana for Azula yet. Now they do. And a Signet, so plenty of ramp. So yeah, there's a Cobra, but no lands to go with all these landfall cards. Although if I play Toph and then play Ozolith, it does actually trigger landfall because it's an artifact. So we can try that. Can also move the Lightning Greaves onto Toph, but the opponent's probably not going to respond here. I guess they might. Trigger landfall, make a treasure. Attack. And then Earthbend onto the Ozolith. Keep Lightning Greaves on Toph, I think. Could also Earthbend onto an actual land, so it can make more mana with the Badger Mole. That also makes sense. Because Ozolith would not be able to tap for mana, despite being Earthbended onto. So there's Azula. And we get to untap, and yeah, now with a land we get to do a lot of things. I want to play Bill before playing the land as well. Probably going to end up tapping this anyway. Liquid Metal Coating also triggers landfall. They might actually have a counterspell. Okay. That works. Play Coating. And then is there anything else I want to do? Can give something haste, but we're not really attacking into Azula here. Probably move the Greaves to the Provisioner, or I can Earthbend onto the Provisioner after targeting it with a liquid metal coating. Although then targeting the Cub is probably better. So I'll move the Greaves here, coating onto Cub. No attacks. And then Earthbend. Yeah, if we had Bristly Bill, we would have been able to set up some pretty sweet attacks and maybe even activate Bill to double the number of counters. So they did kind of take away my win condition here. So they timed their counterspell properly. Now we're probably going to lose a bunch of creatures. Nightbonder also copied, so creatures work too. And I can line up some blocks. So if the Cub dies, it does come back. Should I block with one more creature in case there's more instant speed removal? Nah. Can pretty easily replay my commander. Takes out the Cobra. And then Ozolith also picks up some counters. Can Earthbend here. Ooh, how about Bumi? And Bumi's looking pretty good. So I play it Earthbend 4. Only get an extra attack step when Bumi deals damage, but we can give it haste with a Lightning Greaves, and it does have Trample. Okay. So, sack some of my treasures. Hope their last card's not a counterspell. Play Bumi. Move Lightning Greaves. And then go to attacks, and wow. Opponent scoops it up. I mean, they are at 9. So I get to attack, trample over for at least 1, which then also enables Bumi's Author ability to give me an additional attack step. And so then my lands can keep hitting them an additional time. And that should seal the deal. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. This hand is a bit light on the ramp, although, yeah, the Ascension can maybe bridge the gap towards Primeval Titan to get things going, facing the Tenacious Tactician, so casting non-creature spells to make allies, which will also have prowess. I'll try it. So not much going on in the early turns, although once I get a second green source, Tortoise can also be a form of ramp. Tokasia's welcome, will draw them a lot of extra cards, but I'm happy to play the Ascension here. Get a forest. And then next turn, plan is likely to play the Tortoise. But maybe missing land 4 to play their commander out. And they found it. And get to untap. And yep, play Tortoise. And that resolves. Not guaranteed to get a land back since we haven't drawn a fetch land yet. They will Fateful Absence, but I'll still get the trigger here. Although did not mill a land, so that's unfortunate. Although also means I wouldn't have drawn a land in 3 turns. So now we should be closer. And then land 6 sets up Primeval Titan, so then all our mana worries should be over. Sokka with the mana up can still maybe trigger things. But yeah, for a blue mana there's not too many answers to Primeval Titan here. Strix Serenade comes to mind. Alright, just a bolt on the plains, that's fine. Does make a token which triggers Tokasia's welcome. Alright, let's get some lands. A fetch land makes sense. Is there any other utility lands I can just surveil, I suppose? Secret Tunnel could also be fun. Could get an artifact land, which is indestructible. So we have a couple options. Let's go for an indestructible land. And then I do want to have a fetch land in circulation. Fabled Passage doesn't cost me any life. And we get to grow Primeval Titan, although I don't think I'll get a chance to attack with it again. I guess we already had a indestructible Darksteel Citadel, so maybe didn't have to get the bridge, but I guess it doesn't hurt to have multiple indestructible creatures once we earthbend onto them. We are getting kind of tempoed out here by some cheap removal spells. Opponents got the card draw from Tokasia's Welcome to keep fueling their hand. And Prowess is no joke. Those triggers can quickly add up. Especially if they're sitting on a counter spell, we could be in trouble. Here I'm looking at maybe Titania with a fetch land to make some 5/3s. And then 5 mana. I would still have enough to play the First Metalbender afterwards. I could maybe bait with something, but then I wouldn't be able to use my fetch lands to their full extent. So just gotta hope this resolves. It does. Play fetch lands. Get a counter. And then we'll start fetching. And get a mountain. Grow the token. Play Toph. And now they have the wash away. They could have just paid 3 mana to counter Titania, so I'm glad they didn't. Back to the command zone. Alright, hopefully these blockers can keep us alive for a bit. The foyer can provide card advantage. And no attacks. I like to see that. So let's see. When enters Airbend 2, power equal to the number of counters on lands, so that wouldn't be very high. Could try Avatar Kyoshi, could try and redeploy Toph, maybe throw Hardened Scales into the mix. Also can't forget about Air Temple, which is quite good with Hardened Scales. So, yeah, they have a counter up. I don't want to get my 8-drop countered, so let's take a different approach. Alright, they didn't seem to have an answer there. So maybe I can get away with Avatar Kyoshi. And then I do get to untap a land with it. So I could untap the Darksteel Citadel. Ooh, they did have the Strict Serenade after all, which does not counter enchantments, but does counter creatures, so that's why they didn't seem to hold priority on the Hardened Scales. So that didn't quite pan out. Alright, can still go exploring. My opponent is at 20, so I'm wondering if an attack makes sense. Yeah, let's get a bit aggressive. Happy to trade for 3 tokens, opponent just takes it all. Now Talent can get back a removal spell too. So I could be dead here to all the prowess triggers. Narset's another way to give prowess to all creatures. So now they have double prowess. Yeah, I'm probably dead here. Yeah, if we had removal for Sokka, they never really get things going, but our deck just doesn't have much in the way of spot removal. So we couldn't count on it. And yeah, getting to see all those prowess synergies going off. And a requisition raid for more prowess. And we are very dead. GG's. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the play, and it's Bumi versus Toph, the earthbender matchup. We have Enlightened Tutor to maybe eventually get Mindslaver, but I'm gonna need a lot of mana to make that work, and this hand doesn't ramp. So I'll take my mulligan. Oh, we have Mindslaver. Still missing the ramp cards, but I guess I'll try. Hopefully find some with a Parlor. Keep a Flooded Strand. Turn 1 Chocobo, so opponent's a bit more aggressive. So I just need to survive until the point where I can Mindslaver, Earthbend, activate, and take all the turns. Earthbending student, not quite good enough. Ouroboros could be a decent roadblock. Earthbend onto the Surveil land, so I can maybe Surveil again if it dies. And yeah, Ouroboros will put even more counters on our lands, in turn growing Toph. A Rockalanche makes a 2-2, that's okay. Yeah, still go for Ouroboros here. Pass a turn, happy to play defense, since we know our endgame. Transformation hits Ouroboros. And a Halfling. So yeah, the game's going according to plan, more or less. This turn I'll just go for Toph, play Surveil land. And the One Ring isn't bad either, although I don't really need it. Finding a fetch land with Titania and Morag would be decent, but honestly I just need to build up my mana here. Make sure Bumi doesn't combo kill me. And Badger Mole will Earthbend. And now those creatures have Trample as well. Fellow Retreat also very good with fetch lanes. So I could play Morag, but I think I just go for Mindslaver. Can immediately Earthbend. For 1 mana I don't think they can really interfere. And then next turn we can set up the loop. They can still take out Toph to slow us down. It's been a while since I've Mindslavered someone, so it would be fun if we get to pull it off. Alright, opponent scoops it up. So yeah, next turn we just take our turn, activate this for 4 mana. We get to Mindslaver, controlling the opponent's next turn, setting up bad attacks into our larger creatures. And then because of Earthbend, this comes back, and I can Earthbend onto it once again. So we can just keep activating it over and over, and if they don't have any interaction here to mess us up, we can just lock them out of the game. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Avatar Aang. He has a lot to learn before he can save anyone, but yeah, opponent might have a Moon Mist to transform it. This hand seems functional. We've got 2 ramp cards. Although we also have 2 tapped artifact lands to start out. So turn 2, maybe go for a Shared Roots. Acre Wellspring also a good one to Earthbend with Toph. Because then if it dies, I get to draw multiple cards. Once when it leaves the battlefield, and then once again when it returns. Firebender Ascension to help them firebend. Could also play the Badger Mole to maybe block. Or I can still Shared Roots first. I did draw Fabled Passage, so that also makes me want to play the Roots just to have an extra land so this enters untapped. And then another forest seems fine. Could use the Might to eventually blow up the Ascension, but it's probably going to be a while before this matters. Although, I guess Avatar Aang also has Firebending. So those can eventually add up. Floating mana goes away. Opponent passes with 3 mana up. So I don't necessarily want to play Toph unless we have something more exciting to earthbend onto. Opponent could also have removal up. So instead, go for Wellspring plus Badger Mole. Seems fine. Keep my fetch land to maybe enable landfall later. Also maybe we want to earthbend onto the Fabled Passage so I can sack it twice. Alright, now Nissa's a pretty good payoff for holding the Fabled Passage, that is. Make my bridge into a creature. Opponent had a Get Lost. Well, we still have an indestructible 1/1 now. It's mostly going to be tapping for mana, but at some point we can hold it back on defense. Now an Earthbender Ascension. Opponent also gets to Earthbend. And then they'll have the mana to play Aang next turn. Alright, so it's got to be Nissa into a fetch land. Find Ashaya, that's a good one. So now I could play Toph. And then Earthbend onto the Wellspring. And then Ashaya lets me Earthbend onto all of my creatures, because all of my creatures will be lands as well. What I currently don't have is a great blocker for Aang, since it does have flying. Now Iceberg. I think I just keep Toph in exile, since I can use a Might to get her back. This is 3 mana to Waterbend and Sacrifice, so that's not happening here. Okay, so next up, if I play Ashaya, I could play Bridge, which triggers Landfall, and then playing Might also triggers Landfall, so I can activate it. Find a Provisioner, which I could still cast, and then still play a land. That seems fine. And going off with Landfall. So get back Toph, which will also trigger Landfall again. And could go exploring, or we can play another creature out. Earthbend, and now I can Earthbend onto any of my creatures, including Toph herself, so if they have another removal spell, I just get it back from the Earthbend mechanic. So we can sort of protect all our creatures one by one, but yeah, we're also building up a lot of mana. We've got some pretty nice curve toppers in hand. The Legend of Kyoshi, especially with Avatar Kyoshi, can draw a lot of cards, or with a huge Ashaya, could have drawn easily 12 cards. So yeah, opponent's not coming back from this. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing the 5-color Shrine deck, which has gotten even more shrines now in Avatar, so it's definitely due for an upgrade. This hand is not going to work without green mana for Farseek. And this is not great. We don't have any 2 or 3 mana ramp. Solemn can eventually do it. Yeah, I need to be a bit more proactive in this matchup. Secret Tunnel does help as kind of an unblockable threat eventually, but I'm not drawing a ton of cards with the Legend of Kyoshi. Alright, this is probably better. So turn 1 Veil, turn 2 Plains, turn 3 Sun Petal. Do I want to proliferate? Do I want to top end a Legend of Kyoshi? Problem is I don't have a ton of ramp, but with Cub and Toph we can maybe make enough mana to cast it. So maybe I get rid of the Evolution Sage, since I'm kind of light on landfall cards. And then the Gearhulk can find additional mana creatures, or maybe some interaction. Opponent does have the turn 1 birds. The Ascension's also good with the Cub. Naturalist to discount enchantment spells. So next turn they can play their commander. But they might have something else here. Just a tapped land. Okay. So this turn I could Ascension. Or I can play a Gearhulk and try and find some answers. I think I prefer that. Even though I don't develop my mana as much. So I can get something like a Haywire Might, which can blow up non-creature artifacts and enchantments. Can go for Portable Hole as well. Yeah, let's get both of those. And then I don't mind offering the trade for Naturalist. Opponent's gonna accept. So they play their commander. Cannot answer that with my 1 mana answers. But I can maybe Portable Hole the birds. And then still cast my Ascension to keep on ramping. So I have single red, let's get another one. And I can attack for 4, we're probably still the aggressor in the matchup. So 1 mana away from the Legend of Kyoshi. Toph can also earthbend onto the Gearhulk, so then if it leaves the battlefield I get to re-trigger it. Alright, opponent just cycling a Triumph, so they don't have much going on yet. And a Lightning Greaves for haste. So this turn, have 5 mana, could earthbend once again. This only triggers off landfall. Yeah, I guess we Toph target the Gearhulk. And then I could still play the Might. Portable Hole now also a land, but doesn't tap for mana. Could also target the Might, to be fair, and then I maybe get to activate it multiple times. Yeah, maybe that's more realistic. Don't see my opponent removing Gearhulk after I earthbend onto it. So now 5 mana. Probably gonna see one of the bigger shrines. Nope, just a Sanctum of Tranquil Light for starters. And now Calm Waters. Can draw them a bunch of cards. Ooh, Enlightened Tutor. The plan here is usually to get Mindslaver to Mindslaver lock my opponent out of the game. That might have to wait since it's pretty mana intensive. And then for now I can Might both of their shrines, or start with 1 and take it from there. Hit the blue one. Might comes back. Does trigger the Ascension, because it's a land, and yeah, my opponent's just gonna scoop it up. If we can keep earthbending onto the Might, we can keep blowing up their shrines, and the shrine deck is gonna need them. Haywire Might even exiles, so they cannot get it back with their commander. And then once we have enough mana, we can Enlighten Tutor for Mindslaver, and then just take all of the opponent's future turns, which is usually enough to win the game. Alright, so we got to see this Naya Earthbender artifact deck in action. And yeah, there's a lot of ways to build around Toph, since it plays into landfall synergies, plays well with +1 counter synergies, and then there's also the artifact angle that you can explore. So a lot of ways to go about it, but I've been pretty happy with this build so far. Definitely not the most powerful landfall commander you can come up with, but definitely one of the more unique ones, and definitely gets you thinking about new interactions, turning all sorts of artifacts into lands, in turn tapping for mana, enabling a landfall. So it's definitely one of the more creative decks in this space, although at some point you will just Mindslaver lock someone, and that tends to be the most powerful thing you can do with Toph. But yeah, for now, I want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.